Roll on, Mississippi, roll on. Mississippi, roll on.
It's time to roll on with my 2014 previews. We go to the SEC West, talk about both Mississippi schools, Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Let's begin with the Mississippi Rebels. Ole Miss last season 8-5, but they were only 3-5 in conference play. You might remember that 2013 class a little more than a year ago for Hugh, one of the 5 best in the country, and I thought the young guys for Mississippi did quite well because they got thrown right into the fire, and that included wide receiver LaQuan Treadwell, who was the #1 overall receiver from that high school class from a year and a half back. Had 72 catches, over 600 yards receiving his freshman year. They're going to line him up from the slot to the outside this time. Dante Moncreif, who was the outside receiver, is now in the NFL with Indianapolis. Speaking of the slot, tight end Evan Ingram. Don't be surprised if he plays the slot. Ingram last year was banged up, but he does look as good as new this time around. Running game, lots of experience in this area. Jalen Wilson, Atavius Matters, 2 guys fairly reliable, so the ground game looks intact, and the quarterback position definitely looks intact with the experience. 3rd year that this guy started, that's Bo Wallace, SEC's leading returning passer, and this guy's getting a lot of hype. 69% completion percentage. By the way, 13 TDs, 3 interceptions in the 8 wins last year for Ole Miss. When the team, though, lost 5 games, his completion percentage dropped, only 5 TDs and 7 interceptions. Needless to say, last year they lived, they breathed, and they died through Bo Wallace. So Wallace has to be a little bit more consistent, but overall he's got the capability of being something special. Looking at the defense, and my goodness, I'll tell you what, this is a team that really has an opportunity to do something fantastic, okay? 20 of their 23 players last season for Ole Miss that had at least 10 tackles are back. That is essential. That's a solid rotation that Ole Miss will have. I think defensively, arguably, #1 in the SEC because of the speed, because of the skill, because of the experience as well. Robert Kimdichie, as a defensive end last year, did great things his freshman year. 34 tackles, and by the way, 2 sacks. Also, too, returning, you have linebacker Cedarius Bryant for his senior year. Secondary, these guys I think will have a big impact this season for Ole Miss. Trey Elston at strong safety, a guy that I think that can play in the NFL. Eventually, it's free safety is Cody Pruitt. And remember this guy, too, who should make an immediate impact because of the fact that he's really battled hard during the spring, and that's the transfer from Southern Miss, Anthony Alford at safety, the former quarterback. And by the way, one thing I do need to mention on offense, up front, only 1 full-time starter back, Laramie Tunsil. Tunsil, by the way, as a true freshman, I thought did quite well. And in a couple of years, I think this guy is going to be a high draft pick because he plays left tackle and because he is so good. He was also a gem from that 2013 class for Hugh Freeze. Aaron Morse at left guard, he's back, but last season was hobbled with a torn ACL. The schedule for Ole Miss, you got to play Boise State in the opener. That game's going to be in Atlanta. Boise State features that, of course, that creative, high-scoring offense. But remember, Chris Peterson, the head coach, is now at Washington. So if Ole Miss can get past that game, they can get past Vandy. They have to play them in Nashville for the 2nd straight year, but they should be able to handle Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt didn't look as good this year, not even close. And last year, Ole Miss did win at Vanderbilt. You can win the next 2 against Louisiana and Memphis. Then you get Alabama at home early October, and that begins a very intriguing 5-game stretch. Bama at A&M, that's a dangerous game because it could be a letdown or a hangover depending on what happens with the Tide. Tennessee at home, at LSU, and you host the defending national runners-up in Auburn, defending SEC champs as well. The schedule eases up a little bit with Presbyterian, then you go to Arkansas, and then the Egg Bowl. Last year's game went to overtime with Mississippi State winning at Starkville. This year's game was at Oxford. Best case scenario, I can see 10-2 happening. With as good as this defense is, with Bo Wallace, he's a good quarterback, still has room to improve, but if he can, and if Treadwell continues his progression, and if the ground game does his part for Ole Miss, a 10-win season's not out of the question, and an upset somewhere, maybe against an Auburn or an Alabama, could very well happen. Don't be surprised if that does. for Mississippi. Worst case scenario, if that offensive line, other than Tunsil, doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. And by the way, if Wallace is still an inconsistent quarterback, could 6-6 happen with that schedule? Sure. Look, the middle part of that schedule is dangerous because there's no bye weeks in between that 5-game stretch with Bama, A&M, Tennessee, LSU, and Auburn. So could 6-6 happen? They play in a very difficult conference, very difficult division in particular. And if there are health problems along the way, and remember last year Mississippi State did win the Egg Bowl, not out of the realm of possibility for things to go south for the guys from Oxford. But I do think they're going to be a lot more wins than losses. In fact, I got them going 9-3, pulling off an upset somewhere. But I think somebody's going to sneak up on them as well. 9-3 with a 5-3 conference record and a 4th place finish for Ole Miss. Now let's take a look at Mississippi State. Whopping 24 seniors back on this squad. 8 offensive and 8 defensive starters are back too for Dan Mullen's squad. And it's just like Ole Miss. If Mississippi State played in any other division or in any other conference, they'd have a more legitimate shot at winning the league or the division. But this conference is just that good. Dak Prescott does return for his junior year for Mississippi State at quarterback. Guy had 5 touchdowns in the Liberty Bowl. So Mississippi State, I love the way they closed out the 2013 season. Jamian Lewis, SEC's leading returning receiver, back. He had last year 923 yards receiving. That's invaluable right there. And Darrell Wilson, as a freshman, true freshman, contributed with 3 TDs, by the way. He was a 2-sport athlete, but has decided to put basketball on the back burner because he decided to participate in spring football. So that's valuable experience right there. Tight end Malcolm Johnson is back. And you do return the left tackle in Blaine Clausel. Dylan Day. Really watch for this guy at center. Hopefully he's healthy for Mississippi State. Had to battle some previous injury, hurt in spring. So lack of depth, I think, is going to be an area to watch out for. The right side is going to be fairly new for Mississippi State on that line. Just like Ole Miss, Mississippi State should be very good on defense. I got 8 guys back, as we mentioned. And by the way, 8 defensive players who played at least 10 games last year return as well, so they have a rotation that they can work with on D for the Bulldogs. Preston Jones from Mississippi State's back, along on the other side with Ryan Brown, and a defensive tackle, P.J. Jones. And the linebacking core, boy, these guys have been there before, including the junior Benardrick McKinney, and also, too, the senior Matthew Wells. Corner, this guy's a good one, too, Tavis Calhoun. And, by the way, he'll probably be the leader on this defense for Mississippi State. The safeties are going to be fairly inexperienced. So that's probably the one concern I have for Mississippi State will be at safety. And also 2 special teams. This area was bad. I mean, real bad last year for the Bulldogs. How bad? Only 1 of 4 teams last season that missed more field goals than they made. There were 10 of 21 on field goal tries. And it didn't sound like during the spring football, from what I've heard, that they have resolved that issue any further than what it was last year. So special teams, they got to get that area, fixed because they're going to have close games this year, perhaps, and you don't want those field goal inconsistencies to continue to loom over your head if you're the Bulldogs. The schedule, it is pretty easy as far as the non-conference part of it. As far as the conference part, first tough game September 20th at Baton Rouge against LSU. You get A&M at home at least. That's October 4th. Following week, you host Auburn, so that's a 2-game stretch right there. Who knows how that will go. November 15th, you play Bama, but you have to play them at Tuscaloosa. Very difficult for me to imagine the Bulldogs, as good as they are defensively, them going in there and winning at Bama. Just don't see that happening. And November 29th, Ole Miss is going to have revenge on their minds for the Egg Bowl after what the Bulldogs did in Starkville last season. This year's game, as I mentioned, is at Oxford on November 29th. Best case could be 10-2. Could be a 10-2 season. That is, if the offensive line can find a cohesive method to developing into being that offensive line that Dan Mullen is looking for, and also, 2, if the progression of Dak Prescott continues, and also, 2, if that defense continues to be as good as advertised, I could see 10-2 becoming a possibility with upsets along the way. Worst case, it could go 6-6 for them if the secondary has a hard time in holding their own, and also, 2, if the offensive line is not doing their part. And by the way, 2, if the field goal kicking continues to be as bad as it was last year. Likely, I have an 8-4 record for Mississippi State and a 4-4 mark and a 5th place finish in the SEC West. I just cannot foresee Mississippi State finishing ahead of the heavyweights, LSU, as well as Alabama and Auburn in the SEC West. It's a very tall order, and I think this year Mississippi wins the Egg Bowl game, so that's why I've got Mississippi State finishing in 5th. But I do have good seasons posted for both Mississippi schools. That's my look at Mississippi State and Ole Miss. Thanks for watching.